I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. Don't miss Cold's new Season 3, where I look into the unsolved disappearance of Cherie Warren, a woman last seen leaving her job at a Salt Lake City office in 1985. Police cast suspicion on Cherie's estranged husband and boyfriend, but never made any arrests or recovered Cherie's remains. Find Cold Season 3, The Search for Cherie, anywhere you get your podcasts.
Why was she crying?
Because the father of her soon-to-be child just left her for drugs. Can't imagine many women would be excited to know that they're second, third, fourth, fifth to some substance, and where I'd been lying to her, saying that I had quit. And so we tried to pull it together, and 9 months later, my daughter Sophie was born. And anytime I felt anxiety, I would have to get high, right? So I'm in the delivery room, in the bathroom, trying to shoot up. I can't find the vein, and I hear everything's getting closer to being born, and then I finally get it, and I walked out as they were pulling my daughter out. She got caught in the birth canal, so when they pulled her out, she was purple. She wasn't breathing, and they're telling me to cut the cord, and everything was just so intense. My wife's yelling at me and all these things, and I'm just like, what is going on? And in my head, most people are like, you're going to have a baby, or you have a baby, you should grow up. And in my head, I'm thinking, I can't even take care of myself. How am I going to take care of this little baby? So I didn't get better. I got worse. So here I am. They got her breathing, and they wrapped her up, and I'm holding her for a second, and my family wants me to come out. And so I went out there long enough to show my family, and then I went back in. I gave her to my wife, and I went to my drug dealer's house. Anything, it didn't matter what it was. If it was uncomfortable at all, I had to numb it out. And it got to the point where I couldn't go to work, so my job was to stay home and take care of the baby, while my wife, who just had a baby, had to go to work. And that turned into me taking the diaper and food money and going buying dope and coming home without food and money, passing out on the ground with a baby in the crib that's been there probably all day, and I've been passed out on the ground. And my ex-wife now did the right thing, and she made a big decision to pack up and leave me. And in that moment, I knew that I was getting closer to needing something to change. And I find myself at 31 years old back on my parents' couch because I can't afford the house. And that thought process keeps coming through my head about suicide. And I didn't want my dad to die. And so I'm like, what else? How else can I do this? Like, if I accidentally overdose, that's not a suicide. So I went out and I put 8 balloons in a spoon and drew it up, and that's enough to kill this entire room and probably 3 more down the street. And I shot up, and in my head, the worst thing happened. I woke up the next day. Whoa. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, man, I can't even kill myself right. And my dad came around and sat across from me and handed me a piece of paper, and he said, read it. And I was like, what is it? And he's like, just read it. And I started reading it, and it was my obituary. My dad had written my obituary, and he said, I know you're going to die, but you're not going to do it in my basement. You need to leave. And all I had was my car, and I went and sat down, and I slept in my car down by Pioneer Park for about 3 days. And my ego was still so big at that point that I wasn't going to be homeless. And the only way I could see my daughter is if I had supervised visitation, which gave me an in to get into my parents' house to get a gun. And so I went up, kissed my daughter, went to the bathroom when really I went in and snuck in and got a gun. And gave my mom a hug, gave my dad a hug. And giving my daughter more meant me finally taking my life. She was 7 months old, and she would never have to know me. And so I went up above the Bountiful Temple. There's some benches up there that overlook the temple on the mountain above it. And I knelt down, and I put the gun in my mouth, and I started pulling the trigger. And these visions of my mom and my daughter popped into my head, and I'm like, doing the pros and cons list they teach you. And I knew that my daughter might want to meet her dad one day, but any man on the planet could be a better father than I could be, and that she's going to be okay. And my mom, she's a pretty religious lady, and she loved God so much, and I absolutely hated him. And I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pray to her God so that when he doesn't answer my prayer, that when she dies, she can go look him in his face and say, you failed me. So I knelt down and I said a little prayer. I said, I don't know anything about a still small voice. I'm going to need something a little bit louder than that. And if I open my eyes and I don't get a sign, I'm going to pull the trigger. And right as I went to open my eyes, this is August 31st, 2009, a firework display went off above the temple. And I was sitting there like, is this the freaking sign? And shortly after that, I heard a voice that said, is that loud enough? And I don't know if that was in my subconscious or if I actually heard it or what, but I was paralyzed. And I laid there bawling for about 25 minutes and I couldn't move. Got up, drove down to my parents' house, told them what had happened. I drove myself straight to LDS Hospital, checked into detox, and went to Renaissance Ranch. And that's coming up. My 10-year clean and sober sobriety birthday is on September 1st of this year. And,
we have so many great guests in here that share their story, but I'm in awe of everything that you just told me, and you told me so matter-of-factly. And in my head, you're telling me the story, and I'm wondering, what if your daughter hears this? I mean, does she know about your past? I mean...
Yeah. You know what? I think one of the most important things is showing your kids your fail. I don't know of any other thing to do for my daughters than prepare them. We are so big on protection that we forget to prepare. There's going to come a day on the playground, in high school, dating, that I'm not going to be able to do anything. Did I prepare my children right? And that's all I have. I'm not the super educated guy. My education comes from a ton of fails. So the least I could do to my daughter is to be honest. So she's been to at least a handful, if not more, presentations that I give, because they say in the recovery world, you can't do it for anybody but yourself. You got to want it for yourself. I hated myself. If it was left up to that, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys right now. I did it for my daughter in hopes that if it did work long enough, that she might be able to understand who and what I was. And I'm not perfect, nor will I ever be perfect, and nor does she need to be perfect. But if I educate her, she will never have the opportunity to tell me, well, I didn't know. And in this day and age, you're one wrong button push away from finding out a whole lot of stuff that you might not want your kid to know, or find out from little Johnny on the playground. I want it to come from me. I want it to be factual. People are worried about taking the innocence of their child. Educating them is not taking anything. She still plays with dolls. She still dances in the kitchen. So I'm not quite sure if lying to your children, I think that takes it away, because they're going to see it.
Well, you mentioned something earlier, about, back where you grew up, you didn't talk about those things. And I think that's a theme that it sounds like you've changed in your family. And I would say most people in my field of work would agree is vital. Communication. Can your kids talk to you about anything? That's a great question for any parent who's listening to ask themselves. Can my kids talk to me about anything? Because if they can't, they're at risk for whatever that is. Yeah. Sex, drugs, whatever it happens to be. If they can't talk to you about that and have a real honest conversation where they become educated and they become, like you said, prepared or empowered, then they're at risk there. And so I agree with you. I think by educating your daughters, sounds like you have two now, educating your daughters empowers them, and they know they can talk to dad about anything.
What are some of the reasons parents might not want to talk about it? Is it embarrassment? Is it maybe they don't know the answers?
Well, both of those for sure. A lot of times kids don't want to talk to you about things, especially if we're talking about sex or development, drugs and alcohol. But you just have to keep at it, right? I mean, what's your experience, Rob? Like, has your daughter been like, hey, let's talk about drugs, or has it been kind of a hard thing for her?
No, they are, I think, so I do some life coaching and stuff, and I get a lot of therapists who come and want to do life coaching with me because they're afraid of another therapist finding out that they are doing this, and this.
Yeah.
And one of their remark, I'm like, you got to tell your kids. She's like, I don't want them to look at me different.
Yeah.
It's like, the worst thing I think you can do is put yourself on a pedestal to your children. I think you got to come down to the level, share that it's okay to make mistakes. What it's not okay is to continue making them, and just being real. So all I've done for my daughters is, we take them. I'm just huge on facing fears. I think there's more life skills learned in that alone. So my 10-year-old and my 11-year-old both wrestle, do jujitsu, rock climb, box, because I want to train my daughters to not need a man so one day they can have one. I want them to be confident,
I like that too.
Self-love. It's like I talk about it being a cup with a hole in the bottom. Those people, we all have the life suckers who need to tell them they're amazing, they're beautiful, they're this, they're that. And when they're not getting it, it's empty again. Mm-hmm. Or they're doing, having promiscuous lifestyles or whatever it is.
They're searching for someone to fill that cup.
Yeah. And I want my daughters to know, not in a cocky ego way, how beautiful, smart, and talented they are. And to not give in to any relationship, whether that be with another female, a male, or anything, that people aren't going to respect that and treat you right. Because I spent so much of my life going out pretending to be something so these people knew a fake me, and I would be exhausted and I'd have to go pretend to be this person again, and eventually it just kills you anyways.
So helping them be genuine and authentic and independent.
Love themselves.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So you ended up at Renaissance Ranch, an inpatient program?
Yep.
How many days did you do there?
I did 60. There's zero chance that I would have got sober on my own. I needed to be locked down. And that's when the difference in that was I'm sitting there going over some step work in our group, and they wrote what they call bricks, and it was you'd write about your character defect that day, and I'm like 17 days in, and I'm reading mine, and everybody's just like being dicks. They're like, dude, when are you going to start looking at your anger? And I'm like, I'm not angry. Getting mad at them, right? And I go back to my room, and I'm looking through, and I went back day 1, anger. Day 2, anger. Day 3. 17 days in a row I wrote about anger, and I didn't even know. I was so used to being angry. That was my norm. If it wouldn't have been in my handwriting on that page, I would have never known. So here I am sitting there blaming my ex-wife for leaving me, my dad for not paying my bills, my mom for being rude to me, blah, 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 blah. The dude's like, when did this start? And I'm like, when my wife left. He's like, no. When did you first start hating yourself? And it was like, back to the 6-year-old me. And I had to go back and I had to forgive and apologize to myself and start working through all of those things. Because if I looked at the last 5 years of my life, there's way too much wreckage to even begin there. I needed to just go back. Square one. Forget all this. This is all just noise. And go back to the basics. And get to love myself, get to know what I was good at, what I wanted to be then. How did I get so far off track? And it came from a gang member out of prison, skinhead. And I'm forever indebted to him calling me out and being like, hey, stupid, take a different perspective.
So after you graduated Renaissance Ranch, where did you go?
Well, you're supposed to go to sober living, but me always making my own rules, I was like, I'm going to make my own sober living. So I talked 3 other dudes out of going to sober living and coming to my condo that we were going to rent. And it was those condos right next to Smith's on 89, right off 2600. Mm-hmm. Those little shanty deals. And we all got food stamps, and I'm going from making $35,000 a month with my concrete company to being on government assisted living and food stamps. So that was a huge hit to my ego. That was really hard for me to admit those things. And my bright idea of going in and doing my own sober living, which was just 4 guys who were trying to stay sober together, by the time we even got in, 2 of them had relapsed. So now me and the kid that are left, names are on the contract, and now our rent just doubled. I can't keep a job. I never kept a job. So here I am. And before my dad passed, he's like, man, you're a really terrible employee. You better find a way to make your own money. And I was like, I'm going to show you. And shortly after that, when he passed, I got a job. Right before he passed, I got a job with Serve Pro of Bountiful doing disaster cleanup for $10 an hour. And it was out of spite to my dad's comment, like, I'm going to show you. And we talked about it yesterday about in that moment I had to redefine success. Because if I was constantly chasing money, I was never feeling good enough. I didn't do the work for the right reason. It was never good enough. No dollar amount would have ever achieved me to be happy. And I found myself, somebody told me to find a job you could run on 2 cylinders, something you didn't have to take home, that when you showed up to work, it was there. And that was it. And I always think that the guy's name is Josh, the owner. And him letting me have that job and him holding me accountable to really, truly showing me what I was worth at that time and supporting me through that was a huge lifesaver. And I got to the point where I couldn't afford a therapist. So I got a Pell Grant from the government, and I went back and I just studied psychology at Salt Lake Community College. And it was like, I felt like they talk about the spotlight theory, where you feel like everything's on you and you're getting all hot.
Anxiety, yeah.
And I'm sitting there, and every word that came out of my professor's mouth, I felt like he was talking about me. So I'm looking around, like, make sure not everybody's staring at me. And eventually I'm like, you know what?
Felt like you had the spotlight on you.
Yeah. And so I'd never been a good student. And then in that semester, I got like a 3.95. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So rather than going to school, I was just going to buy all the books and go do self-study. And then I started applying all of that stuff into another guy took me under his wing who owned a gym in Centerville. I'll throw it out, GPP, Neil Anderson.
Love Neil.
So I told him what was up, and he's like, look, I'll make you a deal. Just show up, and if I can't talk you into staying, go. So all I had to do on those days, I would just walk in the door and be like, later. And most of the time he could talk me into staying. But then he's like, you know what? And he took me under his wing and he starts teaching me about fitness and things like that. And he has got some amazing philosophies on life. And a lot of who I am is due to him. So he allowed me to go into his gym when nobody else was there and start training other addicts. And that's how I got my feet wet in coaching. And the philosophies with sports psychology and actually applying it, teaching people how to do hard things in a safe environment, and then getting into ultra marathons and getting into cage fighting and getting into all of these things. We talked a little bit about that. That's where I learned my life lessons. And that's what I eventually turned Eastman Fitness and Wellness into, was kind of a niche gym, lifestyles that you can get fit anywhere. You can pay $10 and go to Vasa. That's not my people. I want to change some lives. I want to go, and if your fear is riding a bull, I want to go ride the bull with you. I want to go jump out of a plane with you. I want to get you strong enough, confident enough that you go, and what has ever kept you stuck in your entire life, I want to go do that with you.
Exposure therapy is what we call that. Yeah.
And 10 years later, here we are.
You're listening to Project Recovery. More from Rob coming up.
Two years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.
I think you're probably the guest with the longest amount of sobriety underneath them, and you're coming up on your 10-year anniversary. What are some of the keys to your success? I think a lot of people would like to know that.
I think being consistent, showing up to it. Like I went to AA every day for 2 years. Every single day.
Wow.
That's the only time that I felt not judged. I felt really, I had a serious judge complex, and those were my people. And I remember when I first shared my story, my sponsor was like, dude, you need to share. Like, you've been sitting here for 3 months and you haven't said a word. You need to share. And I remember saying, hey, my name is Rob. I'm an alcoholic. And then all I remember is saying is, I'll take another 24. I was so scared. I blacked out for the whole, I don't even remember what I said.
Yeah.
And then eventually I got better and I got better and I got better. And then I actually enjoyed sharing my story and seeing the effects, and reached out to some schools and started sharing. And I think the anonymous side of that is where people fail. You gotta share it. You gotta own it.
Yeah, owning it is a big part of it. We talked about it on your podcast. Sitting in your mess is an important lesson.
Yeah.
If you're always bailed out of it, or you don't really comprehend what you've done,
And
or the consequences.
If you're hanging out with people and they don't know that major portion of you, you're a fraud. Like, I don't want to be around anybody that judges me for that. So right off the bat, when I was dating, the very first words out of my mouth were, hey, I'm a recovering alcoholic addict. If you do any of those things, let's just leave it at you're beautiful. Like, I don't even want to get into that. And
so you bring that up right in the beginning. Yeah.
It's like, why get somebody to fall in love with you and then give your dirt?
Well, that's a good point.
It's like, you go look at a car, they don't put a blanket over the top of it and be like, it's a beautiful one under there. No, you lift the hood, you check the carpet, you make sure the wipers work, you check the blinkers.
Right.
And then I've got buddies that don't do that. Mm-hmm. And then the girl, they go out and get a drink. And they sit there for a minute, and the girl asks, why aren't you drinking? And they're so insecure, they have a drink. Relapse. See him in 6 months in the gutter. It came down to that my recovery is more important to me than my daughter. It's that. That right there is the most key thing. Because if I'm not in recovery, I don't have my daughter anyways.
So by prioritizing recovery above everything, it allows you to prioritize and stay connected to all the other important things in your life.
Now, you're the second person in the second week that have told us that, and because I think Cole, who was on last week, told us, he goes, anything I put above my recovery are the first things I'm going to lose.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to love yourself enough to know, like, call it a sick day. Like, call your boss and be like, yeah, I'm mentally jacked right now. So I could come in, but you might lose me forever.
So to take this full circle, a guy who wasn't very good at school, didn't like it, now you spend a lot of time in schools.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So it really started with my son. He was playing baseball, and I married into the family, right? And for me, I was right in the middle of my cage fighting career, and sitting there watching a doubleheader in hopes that he might get up and that he might get a catch. I was like, bro, I'm over there doing burpees down the third baseline. I'm like, dude, we got to do something different. Like, the politics were weird on the team too. He's one of the best players sitting, and I'm like, hey, pick a different sport and I'll help coach. And he's like, well, what about wrestling? And I was like, cool. And I'm like 4 years sober at the time. So I go into practice up at Mueller Park, and they're like, yeah, you got to get a background check. You can't be around the kids. And I was like, oh, okay. So I go to the district. I get fingerprinted, and they do the background check. And, like, you'll find out in 2 weeks. I was like, cool. Next day, I get an email. It says, thanks, but no thanks. And in that moment, I retract back. I'm like, oh, they're judging me. And I was like, wait a minute. To that guy who denied me, I'm just a piece of paper. And I didn't remember all the stuff on my rap sheet, but I would have denied me too. So I printed it off, and I set an appointment, and I went and sat with the guy. And I said, hey, where would you like to start? And I shared my story with him. And he was teary-eyed, and he stamped the paper approved, and he said, we need more coaches like you. And that started my journey. My son was a ninth grader, and I coached that ninth grade year as an assistant. And then Mill Creek Junior High the following year, a head coaching job came up. And then in that time, I saw the attraction that these young boys had to me, and my philosophies and my openness to share fails. And I was like, you know what? This is where I can make a difference. So I got the head coaching job. And since then, they gave me a classroom to work with the troubled youth in the school. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday. And I went from 4 kids to having close to 20. And then Bountiful High called, and they brought me up as the co-head coach for wrestling up there. And I spent so much time working with adults on the intervention that I'm like, man, if we just apply the skills a little bit harder down here, we might not have to deal with so much up here. So I've just fallen in love with being raw and real with these young kids. And I coach volleyball at Mill Creek, working with the girls, and everybody likes to do my temple run. It's like this famous thing, right? And we run from Mill Creek Junior High straight up the mountain all the way to the temple. And we do a little devotional up there, set goals, and build some camaraderie up there, and then run back down. And you take a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, and you face something like, to them, that's a pretty big deal. 1,000 feet, 2 miles up, like that's a big run. And all the emotions they go through, and then they get up there and they see the view. They did that. Nobody took them there. Mom and dad's not there. They grow. They grow a lot in their confidence, true confidence in that moment. They're going to walk a little taller, and when something else hard comes up, they're going to be like, not even close to the temple run. I can do this.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about with my kids is do hard things. And those kids are getting something out of that, doing that hard thing with you, that supersedes the discomfort of running up a hill.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's a lot easier to stay home and play a video game and do other things.
Yeah.
Doing hard things, especially in those formative years, does build the true self-confidence. That's amazing. I'm so impressed that you're out there pushing those kids to do that, because you're absolutely right. If you can get in and work with them now, you don't have to work with them as adults.
Yeah. So, yeah, we use a hashtag building champions, and it's like, for me, and I can only go off of me, but when people would sit, especially adults, would sit and tell me that or the cop would come in during Red Ribbon Week and tell you all the thing, you're going to get arrested. Like, and I don't care. So I want to be able to show them. I don't want to tell them what to do. I show them what to do. I play on the court. I run with them. I do. And that builds a friendship that I think allows them to be a little more vulnerable.
Helps you cut through.
Yeah. And then I noticed that. And then when I got a tattoo, I noticed a lot of them were like, hey, that's a cool tattoo. I was like, oh, bodysuit. Mm-hmm. And the more I do it, I find that instead of taking 20 minutes for somebody to give me everything, it takes 5.
Pretty amazing.
They're like, they're either judging me like he's done some bad stuff. Anything I tell him, he's not going to judge me, or he's been through some stuff, so he'll get it. Either way, it's a win-win. And then also with adults, I want them to see that people can have a second chance. Like, I walk through the hallways and there's parents that come in and they're like, why do we have guys like that around our kids? They're like, that guy is the one that helped your daughter the other day when she was talking about suicide.
That's Coach.
Yeah.
Coach Eastman.
Yeah.
Stand and Fight is the name of your podcast.
Yeah, we added podcast to the back of it because if you put in Stand and Fight, a million things come up. So Stand and Fight podcast, it'll pop right up.
And what kind of stuff do you tackle on the Stand and Fight podcast?
I'm huge on all mental health stuff, facing adversity, and just getting real with things that you personally struggle about, because I guarantee you, at least you guys are probably bigger, at least 100 of my listeners, it's going to touch them. It's like, at least, whether it's you or your kid or your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad, 100% of everybody has felt depression, anxiety, dealt with something. Let's talk about it.
I love it.
No, I'm so impressed. So you're doing really great work, and there are going to be kids growing up who those experiences with you will stay with them for their whole lives. Thanks for doing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
If people want to know more about your program and what you offer, where do they go?
You can find me on Coach Eastman and the number 8 on Instagram. We're Eastman_recovery. So my gym is Eastman Fitness and Wellness. And then my nonprofit is Eastman Family Recovery Foundation, that we work with families in crisis, dealing with suicide and addiction awareness, and education. I think people are not as educated as they should be, whether it's happening to you or around you. It's like we should all be first responders, right?
Yep.
You don't have to know all the ins and outs like this guy, but you should know how to get them to this guy. So we want to help the people, make it not so scary, because it's not scary. It's human. It's going to happen. What do you do when it does? So we want to help.
We've got to support each other, and by breaking down barriers, talking about things that in the past we didn't talk about, by being authentic and non-judgmental. I mean, that brings us all into the fold and into support when we need it. And that's amazing. You shouldn't have to wonder where to turn for support, right?
Yeah, I think that's we wait just a little bit too long.
Hey, well, I appreciate you stopping by and being honest with us, and thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
I got one more important question for you. Can I get a ride home?
Absolutely.
Hey, if you know somebody who needs help, have them do what I did. Give Pinnacle Recovery Center a call. They'll get you on your road to recovery. Thank you very much, Dr. Matt. Thank you, Tilton. If in case you didn't know, Tilton is keeping the V-neck T-shirt people in business.
You know, he rocks that V-neck.
Every day.
Yeah, and he looks good.
Yeah. Hey, this Project Recovery is a KSL podcast.